Hey friends, welcome back to another pottery tutorial. So today we are making a super cute espresso cup, and I love all things tiny, so this one has a special place in my heart. So first thing, of course, you need to cut out all your templates, and then we're going to be rolling out two different slabs here today. So first I'm going to do a 1/2 centimeter slab. And on this slab, I'm going to cut out the C10 and the C12 template. This slab is definitely a little bit too big. I started out with 1.2 kilo here, which was definitely more than I needed, but any of the offcuts I'm going to be using to make the second slab. So don't worry, you can always wedge up your clay again if you roll out too big of a slab. In the end, I only used about 400 grams of this clay for this project. So set those two template pieces aside, and then we're going to go on to the 1 centimeter slab. And if you don't have thickness gauges yet, I really recommend them. It makes rolling out perfect slabs super easy. So for this 1 centimeter slab, we're going to be cutting out the last two templates. That's C13 and C11. So this is the espresso saucer and then also the handle. So a little note when you're cutting out the handle, the C11 template, I personally found it easier to not cut out that little circle in the middle and just use my needle tool to trace through the template. I found that this worked just a little bit neater. Of course, you can cut it out right away, but I preferred to wait a little bit until the handle was a little bit drier. So as usual, I'm going to put my espresso pieces in front of the fan for a little bit to dry out. I'll leave them here for about 10 minutes, and when you let them dry out a little bit, it helps them to be a little bit less floppy, and I just find them easier to work with. Okay, so first things first, we're going to work on the cylinder part of the espresso cup. So as usual with cylinders, you want to cut each side at a 45-degree angle. I have this handy little angle cutter here that makes 45-degree angles really easy, but of course you can just cut it with a needle tool or with a knife, whatever you have. And then each of the cut sides you want to score. And then we're just going to overlap those two 45-degree angles and press them together. So go ahead and blend them in. It doesn't have to be perfect quite yet. We're going to be doing some more blending later, but just make sure it's really well stuck together at this point. And then we're going to add the bottom here. So this is the smaller circle. Don't confuse it with the saucer thicker slab. This is the 1/2 centimeter slab. That's the smaller circle. And you want to put the body of the espresso cup on it, trace around it, and score each side that's going to be attaching. This is how I like to attach bottoms. I just give them a lot of pats, and I find that to be perfectly sufficient to get them to be attached. This works well with my clay without slip because the clay is still fairly wet here. But of course, if your clay requires slip, you should add slip with all of these attachments that I'm making here. I do like to add a little bit of water just to smooth out any extra scoring lines in the center of the pot. And then go ahead and use your needle tool to cut off all of the extra clay on the bottom and blend the bottom into the wall. Okay, now it's time to add the handle, and what I like to do here is I like to use this opportunity to hide the seam a little bit, so I'll actually put the handle on top of the seam. That way you can completely disguise it from the outside at least. So first thing I'm going to do is cut out this center piece here with my needle tool. And I'm just smoothing it out. And then, yeah, we're just going to attach it just like we attach everything else. So I'm marking with my needle tool where it's going to be attaching. So that I know where exactly to score. So I'll score between my marks, and of course also I need to score the handle. So you always need to score both sides of the pieces that you're attaching. I find scoring way more important than slip. As you can see, I don't use slip, but scoring is actually really, really important. And then, yeah, just attach it. And once again, I'm using a little bit of water to smooth out any extra scoring lines. And there we have it. Our little espresso cup is fully assembled. We're not totally done with it. I'm going to do some more smoothing later, but for now, we're going to leave it as it is and move on to the saucer. So for the saucer, the first thing I like to do is take some time to smooth out the edges. Now you can be as particular with this as you like. I just like to smooth out any sharp edges and just make everything look, smooth. And then to make the saucer shape, I'm going to use my thumbs to kind of turn up the edges. Now, if your clay is sufficiently dry enough, it should be able to hold this turned up edge. If you're finding that your edge just kind of flops right back down, you want to put it back in front of the fan for a little bit, or just, wait some time for it to dry out. It should be able to hold this shape if your clay is dry enough. Okay, so that's actually all we're going to do today, but I do have some more things that I want to do tomorrow once it's leather hard. So for now, I'm just going to set them aside. Of course, I couldn't resist making a second pot. And I'm going to cover them with some fabric for the night. So first things first, once our pot is leather hard, I'm going to go ahead and spend some time smoothing out any rough edges. I can get in there with my finger or with a rib to just really make it nice and crispy. Once again, just, do this to the point where you're satisfied with it. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is the whole point of hand making pottery. So that's what he looks like when he's done. Now, this part is completely optional, but I really like to add a little bit extra to the saucer by adding a divot that fits underneath the cup. So what you want to do is center your cup on your saucer and trace around it. So I'm just using my needle tool to make a little line. And then I'm going to go in with a trimming tool or a carving tool. So this is like a very basic standard trimming tool that is in pretty much any beginner pottery kit. Doesn't need to get more complicated than that. And then I'm just going to slowly but surely remove some of the clay and create that little divot. If you wanted to and you have access to a wheel, you could also bring this over to the wheel, but I wanted to show you a way that you can do this without a wheel. And there you go, it fits really nicely in there. Now that our pot is finished, I'm going to pop it into the kiln. I'm doing a bisque fire first, and then I'll glaze it with some white glaze. So y'all ask me quite often what kind of glaze I'm using. I'm using a very basic white glaze from Carl Jaeger. It's the cheap stuff. It's nothing complicated. If you're looking for that speckled look, that's actually in the clay itself. So I also get my clay from Carl Jaeger. This is the 32 clay, which has iron in it that makes these nice speckles. So look for a clay that has some speckles in it if you want to have the speckled clay look. And here is the final result. I find these to be so completely adorable. I could also see sizing up this template to make a larger cup. I really love this kind of modern style handle, and it doesn't need to stay as an espresso cup. You could size it up. If you change the settings of the scale in your printer, you could go ahead and size this template right up to pretty much any size you wanted to. And it would be a really cool little modern teacup. Whatever you like. I also love the tiny version, of course. So I hope that this tutorial was helpful for you. I hope that you love the template. It will be linked down below in the video description, and you can go ahead and check out my website if you're looking for more templates. I've got loads. All right, friends, I'll see you next month with a new template.